Hi, Al Williams, WD5GNR here. I just thought I'd give you a quick and dirty tour of QDMR, which is a Linux piece of software that will let you create code plugs for certain radios. In particular, I've got a code plug loaded right now that's for a radio running OpenGD77. It actually is a Baofeng 1701, but in fact, that's not the stock firmware on that radio, but that's okay. So I'm just going to show you a few things that might not be obvious. You can obviously open and save code plugs, good. You can export the data to chirp, which would be good if you had a bunch of analog repeaters that you wanted to keep in sync. You can also import from things like chirp. So to get all your analog repeaters in, if you've already got them in chirp, you can export them from chirp, import them here, and that'll take care of that. The rest of the menus, you can obviously read and write the code plug or the call sign database to the radio. There is a way to refresh the call sign database and the talk group database. We'll see why that is set up that way in a minute. And then you've got all these tabs along here. Now, some of these won't apply. So, for example, we don't use scan lists on the 1701. We don't use GPS APRS. We don't use roaming channels. And we don't use roaming zones because those things just aren't necessary on that radio or don't work on that radio. But this is made for lots of different kinds of radios. So you can see the basic settings, pretty much stock stuff. But what's interesting is you have these extensions. So if you have this particular type of radio, you can make up the extensions here and set different options, and it'll only pick those up if you're programming that kind of radio. So that allows you to support multiple radios with one set of code plug data. So let's just pretend I had an Anytone, and you see I created that with the button down there. There's a little thing here to drop it down, and now there's all these different options that I can set if I want pro mode, if I want the display settings, and lots of different things for that particular radio. Now, I don't have that radio, so I'm going to remove it before I forget. But you're going to see that again and again, that there's these extensions for different radios for different pieces of this. So the first thing we've got is our contact list. This is all the talk groups that you could have. It's interesting because you don't have necessarily a good way to handle things where you've got like a prefix. So like say DMR TechNet, that has a prefix of 5 on my radio. So there it is, 5031268. Well, I say my radio, really it's my hotspot. But if I had, say, a repeater that natively spoke that network, then I would need 31268 on there. And so I would have to make another entry. That's why I have HS there to remind me that that's set up just for the hotspot. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. You can add, by the way, just regular DTMF contacts, which probably aren't very useful for us. But you can add a digital contact, and that's normally what we're interested in for DMR. Most of the networks won't let you do an all call, and private calls aren't that useful generally, once in a while. But usually you want a group call. And you might think, well, gee, now I got to go look up the number for the talk group, but in fact, it's got a database of those. So if I were to say Texas, okay, there's Texas 10-minute limit and Texas TAC. And if I were to pick, say, the Texas TAC, it throws that number in there. So, of course, you can put whatever number you want in there, and you could change the name to anything you want. But if you want to look it up really quick, if for some reason I wanted Asia in there, for example, there's Asia, Middle East is 94. So that's kind of nice. And once again, we have the extensions. And in fact, we've got an OpenGD77 set of extensions here. I'm going to go find one that has the extensions already set. There it is. And you can see that it tells me the time slot, and it says if set, it overrides the channel. So there must be a default time slot somewhere, and there is. But this is the time slot that you can override that default with if you want on a per talk group basis. Now that also leads to the problem if you do override it there. Some repeaters might have the same talk group but on a different time slot. So that is another case where you might have like America Link time slot 1, America Link time slot 2. it would be inconvenient if every time you went to a repeater, say the repeater might have 5 talk groups, and you had to look through all of these and remember which of them are the 5 that are on that repeater. And obviously, that's why they have group lists. So a group list is just a list of talk groups. Now keep in mind, especially with OpenGD77, I can press the octathorpe or the pound key, whatever you want to call it, and then put any number I want in. So really, you could have left all of that blank if you don't mind remembering, oh, I want to talk on US, that's 3100, or I want to talk to, the parrot, that's 9990. So if you don't mind remembering those, you don't need any of this at all. But presuming that you have a list, you can make this sub list, if you will. And it's not like they can only go in one place, right? So like global might be in every one of these, or it might only be in half of them. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. And once again, we have extensions. There's nothing on this extension. I guess none of the radios have anything interesting to do for groups of talk lists. But the reason they're grouped up that way is when we go make the channels, you'll see there's several different kinds of channels. There's the FM ones, which are just the normal repeaters. And then there's the DMR ones. And I also have some FM ones that are like the NOAA channels, and they're set to receive only and things like that. But if you go look at the DMR setups for, say, well, let's look at my hotspot, for example. It's got the receive and transmit frequency, the low power. I got a scan list in there, but this radio doesn't really use that. I was just experimenting. You can set a different DMR ID than your default. I would not suggest that, but I guess there's some cases that might be interesting. You can, when are you allowed to transmit on this channel? Always when the channel's free or when the color code is correct. Well, this is my hotspot, so I have it always. I can always send to it. Whether it'll listen or not is another question, but I'm not really interfering with anybody else. There's the color code, the default time slot. There's that group list. You can also have a contact that is kind of the default for this channel. I don't think you'd use that very much for ham radio, although I guess you could. And then again, we don't use the positioning and the roaming on this particular radio. But now we've got these extensions, and you'll notice I have the OpenGD77, and it's got other things like whether I'm in power saving mode, whether I've got beeps on the keyboard. You can override a fake location on it, which, like I say, I don't do any of the APRS stuff. So that's how you tell it the actual channel. And unlike some radios, this channel is agnostic of the talk groups, other than you've got this list in here and maybe the contact if you had it. So this list just gives me that I can scroll through the list. It does not force me to be only on those. I can still override it and go anywhere that I want. So that's good. Let's see. Then you've got zones. The zones aren't that important if you're not doing roaming, but in this case, it just gives you a way to group things together. So like I have a simplex zone that has all my simplex channels in it, and I have to change to that zone or be in the all channel zone or whatever they call it. But, if I'm in the hotspot zone, I only look at the hotspot stuff. If I look in the home, that's kind of my home repeater area. You don't actually have to do that, but it's just a way that you can set up what's on channel A, what's on channel B. Again, there's extensions, but not for my radio. So in this case, I don't really care, and I mainly just stay in the all the time anyway. Once you have all that done, you could save it, of course, download it to the radio. You can upload it back from the radio, but it's better to just save it, I think. There are some options here, where to go get the repeater info, a couple of things about programming and the call sign database, whether you want to limit how many items come in or not, and whether you want to show commercial features and different things with the extensions. So that's really about it. I hope that was helpful to you. There are a few things you have to use the original CPS software. Like if I want to flash new firmware, this doesn't do that. There's a couple of other things like sending satellite data to, the Keplers or whatever they call those, the orbital elements over to OpenGD77. This doesn't do that either that I know of. But for most of what you do, this is perfectly fine, works great under Linux, and very easy to set up and use. So 7.3.